They threw me out of the family dinner for being a disappointment. But now I'm being hunted by black SUVs and my own mother for possessing something that can kill with a sound wave. The air in the grand dining room of Aunt Beatrice's estate always smelled the same: old money, beeswax polish, and a faint underlying scent of simmering resentment. This wasn't just any Sunday dinner. This was the annual reckoning, the one night where the entire sprawling, judgmental tapestry of the Harrington clan gathered, usually to dissect my life choices with the precision of tax auditors. I arrived 15 minutes late, deliberately, wearing a vintage silk suit I'd thrifted in Milan, a stark contrast to the stiff navy wool monstrosities my cousins favored. I knew the move was provocative, but frankly, after 28 years of being the family disappointment, provocation was my only remaining inheritance. My father, perpetually stiff-backed and disappointed, didn't even look up from carving the roast. My mother simply pressed her lips into a thin white line, the universal Harrington signal for shame. The silence that greeted my entrance was thick enough to chew. "Took you long enough, Julian," Uncle Gerald boomed from the head of the table, his voice grating like gravel on marble. "Thought you might have finally decided to move back into the real world and avoid the spectacle." I slid into the empty seat between Cousin Cassandra, who was already loudly detailing her divorce settlement negotiations, and my grandmother, the matriarch, whose eyes were twin chips of glacial blue ice. "Just tying up some loose ends, Uncle," I replied, offering a smile that felt brittle even to me. "Business." "Business," scoffed Cousin Marcus, who managed the family's failing real estate portfolio. "Meaning what, Julian? Are you selling artisanal sourdough again? Or did that questionable NFT venture finally collapse?" The barbs were expected. Routine. I usually let them bounce off, maintaining a facade of amused detachment. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, I wasn't here for their usual passive-aggressive torture. Tonight, I was delivering a verdict, not receiving one. I waited until the soup course had been cleared. The clear consommé, notoriously bland, was the perfect emotional palate cleanser, and took a slow sip of the frankly excellent Bordeaux. All eyes, I noted, were now subtly turned in my direction, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. "Actually," I began, placing my crystal glass down with a soft clink that somehow sounded deafening in the sudden hush, "I have an announcement." Aunt Beatrice, ever the anxious hostess, immediately fluttered. "Oh, darling, did you bring someone home? Is it serious? Because we simply don't have room for another guest at Christmas. Unless they are properly vetted, you know how your cousin Penelope gets about seating arrangements." "It's not a proposal, Aunt Beatrice," I cut in gently, but with a firmness that made her pause mid-sentence, a rare victory. "It's about my future, and by extension, yours." Grandmother Harrington finally lowered her silver soup spoon. Her gaze pinned me to the mahogany chair. "Get on with it, Julian. We are not here to be entertained by your melodrama." I leaned forward, feeling the adrenaline finally kick in. This was the moment. I inhaled deeply, drawing in the scent of beeswax and judgment one last time before blowing the whole structure down. "I'm not taking the position at Harrington Trust," I said. A few of the younger cousins exchanged confused glances. "I am also officially severing all financial ties with the family holdings, and, effective immediately, I am resigning from the board of the Harrington Foundation. You can have the unused office space back." The silence that followed wasn't thick. It was absolute zero. Even the heavy ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to have frozen. My father slowly set down his carving knife. His face, usually a study in controlled disapproval, seemed to briefly flicker with genuine shock before hardening into an expression of icy fury. "You are what?" he articulated, his voice dangerously low. "I'm leaving," I repeated, meeting his glare without flinching. "I've liquidated my small share of the initial trust, the original seed money Grandpa gave all the grandchildren, and I've invested it elsewhere, somewhere far more interesting than managing the decaying assets of a company that peaked in 1987. Aunt Beatrice let out a small, wounded gasp. "Julian, that's your legacy. You're throwing away everything we built for you." "No," I corrected, standing up now, feeling tall for the first time in years. You built a cage lined with gilded expectations. I'm stepping out. And frankly, I don't need your approval, your money, or your participation in my life anymore. Consider this my formal exit interview. I looked directly at my father. We are done. That was the cue. Before anyone could process the sheer audacity of my declaration, the betrayal of centuries of expectation, my father shot up, overturning his water glass in the process. "Get out," he roared, his control finally snapping. "You insolent, ungrateful child. You will never darken the door of this family again. You are no Harrington. Do you understand me? You are disowned." Cousin Marcus started laughing, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "Good riddance, Julian. Go play in the sandbox. We'll send you a postcard from the yacht." I nodded once, a final, formal acknowledgement of their rejection. "Understood. Thank you for the warning, Father. I wish you all luck managing the inevitable collapse." I turned on my heel, walked past the horrified faces, through the opulent foyer, and out the massive oak front doors. The cool evening air hit my face, feeling clean and sharp. I got into my battered old Volvo, the one they all mocked, and drove away, not looking in the rearview mirror. I had done it. I was free. The relief was intoxicating, even if the silence in the car was momentarily deafening. I pulled onto the main highway, my phone buzzing incessantly in the cup holder, but I ignored it. They could rage into the night. 3 hours later, I was parked outside my tiny rented apartment downtown, ordering a celebratory cheap pizza. I finally checked my phone. It wasn't just buzzing, it was vibrating itself off the passenger seat. Dozens of missed calls and texts, mostly venomous, some just incredulous. I scrolled past the usual vitriol until I hit a notification from a major financial news aggregator I subscribed to, one they would never read unless it involved a merger. The headline was massive, flashing red alerts across the screen. Harrington Global Assets Freeze. SEC launches full investigation into fraud and mismanagement. My heart stuttered. I clicked the link. The article detailed a massive federal inquiry into decades of alleged accounting manipulation at Harrington Trust, directly implicating the senior partners, my father, Uncle Gerald, and Grandmother Harrington, in systematic embezzlement. The assets weren't just frozen, they were seized pending investigation. The family fortune, the legacy, the cage I had just shattered, it was all being dismantled by the government in real time. And then my phone began to ring again, not with a family member, but with an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered, expecting maybe a bail bondsman or a very confused lawyer. Instead, I heard the strained, frantic voice of my cousin Cassandra, completely unhinged. Julian, where are you? You have to come back. Dad is downstairs talking to the police. He's pointing fingers everywhere. He just screamed that you were the only one who ever questioned the quarterly reports. What did you do?" My hand tightened around the phone until the plastic dug painful ridges into my palm. The cheap slice of pepperoni pizza suddenly tasted like ash in my mouth. "What did I do, Cassandra?" I managed, my voice surprisingly steady despite the sudden lurch in my stomach. "I resigned. I walked away from the poisoned well, remember?" "He's saying, oh God, he's saying you uncovered it. He's saying you were secretly auditing everything before you left. He's telling the federal agents you provided him with inside information, proving their innocence and implicating their partners." Cassandra's breathing was ragged, punctuated by the muffled sound of shouting in the background. My father's voice, undoubtedly, now reduced to bargaining with the very authorities he'd always believed he could bribe or intimidate. This was unbelievable. In my quiet act of rebellion, I had done more than just reject their world. I had inadvertently positioned myself as the loyal whistleblower, the prodigal son who saw the rot and fled, leaving the culprits to twist in the wind. I hadn't done any secret auditing. The only thing I'd been auditing was the structural integrity of my own sanity. Cassandra, listen to me, I said, trying to inject calm into the chaos leaking through the line. I didn't audit anything. The only thing I've looked at in the last 6 months was my personal savings account. Your father is lying to save his skin. He's trying to throw a distraction to the feds, and he's using my departure as proof that I orchestrated some grand, preemptive exposé. It doesn't matter what he's saying now, she hissed. They are taking the ledger books. The investigators are asking for you. They said your name came up in the preliminary findings, that you were the last person to have access to the secure server room before the locks were changed last month. Julian, they think you're the one who took the damning evidence and used it as leverage to get out clean. The server room. I hadn't thought about that in weeks. I had been down there last month, not to steal anything, but to retrieve some archived family photos for my mother, a peace offering I'd eventually abandoned. I remembered the clunky old access keycard feeling sticky, the door latch giving a weird, slight grind before opening. I'd spent maybe 10 minutes inside, retrieving a dusty box of sepia prints, and left. I was in there for 10 minutes, Cassandra, looking for photos. I didn't touch anything else, I insisted, but a cold dread was creeping up my spine. If the feds believed I had meticulously planned an exit strategy involving corporate espionage, they wouldn't just leave me alone. They would investigate me. They don't believe you, Julian. They've got warrants out for your apartment, and I just saw an unmarked black car pull up across the street. They aren't wearing uniforms. They look like security, but they're moving. Cassandra's voice cracked, dissolving into panicked sobs. You need to disappear. Now. Don't come back here. They're calling you the inside man. The line went dead as Cassandra's phone likely got confiscated, or she dropped it in sheer terror. I stared at the cold pizza box. An unmarked black car, federal agents, framed for corporate theft by the very family who had just publicly disowned me. The irony was almost beautiful, if it weren't potentially career-ending, life-destroying, prison-bound beautiful. I snatched my keys and wallet. My little Volvo, reliable enough for getting away from judgment, was probably too slow to outrun federal surveillance. I sprinted down the 3 flights of stairs to the street level. It was quiet. Too quiet for a Saturday night in the city. I scanned the street. Directly across from my building, idling under the weak sodium light of a streetlight, was a large, matte black SUV. Tinted windows. No discernible plates at this distance. It looked exactly like the type of vehicle used by people who preferred anonymity over obeying traffic laws. I ducked behind a parked sanitation bin, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I needed a plan, and I needed it yesterday. Running was one thing. Running from the law, even falsely accused, was another. If they believed I had evidence, they would assume I still had it. And if they found nothing in my apartment, they would assume I had moved it, perhaps to the only place they wouldn't dare search immediately, the Harrington estate. It was a fortress, but it was also the last place they would look for me if they thought I was guilty and hiding. If I could sneak back in, find whatever phantom evidence they believed I possessed, I might be able to destroy it, or better yet, find the real evidence that implicated my father and use it to clear my name before they locked me up for something I didn't even do. It was insane. It was reckless. It was the only way out of the trap my own departure had sprung. I pulled out my phone again, not to call anyone, but to look up the estate's security schematics, information I'd memorized years ago, back when I briefly worked for the security consultant hired to upgrade their medieval alarm system. There was a rarely used service tunnel beneath the west wing, accessible through the old potting shed grounds, rarely checked since Aunt Beatrice decided gardening was too common. I took a deep, shaky breath, the smell of stale garbage replacing the scent of expensive Bordeaux. I had to get across the street without being seen by the silent black beast parked opposite. I waited for a passing city bus to obscure the SUV's view, and then I bolted, diving into the shadows of the alleyway leading to the subway station, the first leg of my impossible journey back to the Dragon's Den. As I reached the mouth of the subway entrance, a blinding spotlight suddenly snapped on from above, originating from the roof of the building directly behind me, illuminating the alleyway in harsh, unforgiving white light. A loudspeaker crackled to life, the voice metallic and devoid of human emotion. Julian Harrington, stop moving. You are in violation of a federal restraining order. Place your hands where we can see them and prepare to be detained. The light was physical, burning into my eyes, stripping away the cover of the city's shadows. For a terrifying second, I was paralyzed, caught in the beam like a nocturnal creature exposed to noon. My mind screamed run, but my legs felt temporarily welded to the concrete. Then, a deep, guttural sound cut through the speaker's sterile demand, the sound of tearing metal and grinding gears. It wasn't the police. It was far too heavy, far too mechanical. From the mouth of the alley, just 20 feet away, a shape emerged from behind the large dumpster I had just hidden behind. It wasn't a squad car or an unmarked SUV. It was a repurposed industrial sanitation truck, one of the heavy-duty beasts used for construction site clear-out, painted a nondescript gray, but bearing no company logos. And it was moving directly toward me, its massive hydraulic claw arms slowly extending like the limb of a grotesque metal insect. This wasn't the SEC. This was something worse. This was hired muscle, or perhaps family muscle, acting before the feds could even process the paperwork. "Drop the phone, Harrington," the loudspeaker boomed again, the voice now overlaid with a low electronic distortion. "Cooperation secures you a swift extraction. Resistance secures a messy cleanup." The industrial claw was closing the distance rapidly. I didn't have time to fight or reason. If they intended to extract me, I knew exactly what that meant. A black bag, a long drive, and an accounting ledger written in broken bones. I made a desperate lunge not toward the subway entrance, but sideways, throwing myself hard against the brick wall of a dry cleaner, flattening myself against the rough surface, just as the massive claw slammed down where I had been standing a heartbeat before. The concrete buckled, sending a shockwave of debris and dust into the air. I scrambled along the wall, using the churning sanitation truck as momentary cover. Its bulk was so large that it temporarily blocked the view of the roof-mounted spotlight, plunging me back into blessed darkness between the vehicle and the adjacent building. I needed an escape route that didn't involve being crushed or shot. The subway was still an option, but descending underground meant a guaranteed bottleneck. The roof, however, the origin of the light, that was where the true threat lay. Looking up, I saw a rusted fire escape winding up the side of the building, perilously close to the roofline. It was my only shot at turning the tables, even slightly. Ignoring the searing pain in my shoulder from the scrape against the brick, I lunged for the lowest rung of the fire escape and began to climb, moving with a panicked speed I hadn't possessed since I was a teenager evading curfew. Each rung shrieked under my weight, amplifying the noise in the sudden, tense quiet that followed the truck's destructive arrival. As I ascended, I risked a glance over my shoulder. The sanitation truck was maneuvering, its massive front end scraping the building in an attempt to gain a better angle. And there, moving with surprising agility for men wearing tactical gear, were two figures descending from the roof, rappelling down ropes directly toward the fire escape landing just above me. They were faster than I anticipated. I kicked hard against the rusted metal of the escape, trying to gain distance, but the movement only seemed to jostle the already precarious structure. The bolts groaned under the sudden strain. I pulled myself onto the landing just below the roof access door. I could hear their heavy boots landing on the platform above me, the sharp click of weapons being unholstered. I pressed my back against the cold steel door, praying it was locked from the inside. I fumbled for a tool, anything. My keys were useless. Then, my fingers brushed against something hard and metallic, tucked into the back of my belt loop. I'd forgotten I'd even grabbed it during my hasty exit from the dining room. It was the solid, heavy silver letter opener I'd pocketed from the mahogany desk, a ridiculously ornate, three-pronged piece of metal my grandfather had used for decades. It was sharp. The roof door shuddered violently as something heavy slammed against it from the outside. They weren't knocking politely this time. "Last chance, Harrington. Open the door," one of the agents shouted, his voice close enough to feel the vibration in the metal frame. I didn't open it. Instead, I braced myself, holding the letter opener low, ready to defend against whoever was about to breach the access point. The metal finally gave way with a screech of tortured hinges, not outward, but inward, collapsing slightly as one of the men kicked through the weakened lock. A dark silhouette filled the narrow opening, followed immediately by the bright, blinding beam of a tactical flashlight aimed directly at my face. I squeezed my eyes shut, raising the letter opener defensively, but before I could even begin to swing, a piercing, high-pitched electronic whine erupted from the floor of the roof, suddenly overpowering the sound of the truck and the shouting agents. It was a sound that vibrated deep in the bone, a resonant frequency so disruptive it felt like my teeth were rattling loose. The agents on the roof froze mid-motion. The flashlight beam wavered violently, then died. The electronic whine sharpened into an unbearable shriek, and I watched in dazed horror as the man breaching the door suddenly gasped, dropped his weapon with a clang, and clutched his head, his body spasming uncontrollably as if struck by lightning. He pitched forward, not falling onto the fire escape, but seemingly levitating slightly before dropping straight down into the dark void of the alley below, emitting one final, strange, distorted electronic chirp that cut off abruptly. My ears were ringing agonizingly, but through the ringing, I heard another voice, calm and synthesized, coming not from the agents, but from something small, sleek, and clearly electronic that had just fallen from the dying agent's belt and skittered across the rooftop near my feet. "Julian Harrington," the small device whispered, its voice utterly devoid of emotion. "Protocol deviation detected. Immediate reassignment initiated. Your former family is now a hostile network. Proceed to rendezvous point Gamma 7. Failure to comply will result in remote termination." The small, sleek device, which looked less like a piece of conventional surveillance gear and more like something salvaged from a downed alien craft, ceased its unnerving whisper as abruptly as it had begun. Silence rushed back in, heavier and more menacing than before. I stared at the device, then down at the place where the agent had been standing moments ago. He hadn't just fallen, he had dropped, as if the electricity powering his very existence had been abruptly cut. The sound he made before hitting the ground below was not the sickening crunch of a normal fall, but a muted, strange thud, almost absorbed by the night. My mind, already strained past its breaking point by the family dinner, the federal investigation threat, and the tactical truck, struggled to process this impossible escalation. This wasn't just high-stakes corporate sabotage. This was sci-fi thriller territory, and I was suddenly, unwillingly, the protagonist. The remaining agent on the roof platform, who had been securing the rappel line, had also stopped moving. He remained frozen, flashlight still off, one foot lifted mid-step on the roof access ladder, an unnerving statue caught in the act of pursuit. I looked from the frozen operative to the small, silent device near my foot. Hostile network, remote termination. My father hadn't just lied to the feds, he had lied about the nature of the family business. Harrington Global wasn't just a failing trust fund, it was a front for something far more secretive, far more technologically advanced, and clearly violently protective of its secrets. The artisanal sourdough jokes suddenly felt terrifyingly close to the truth in a way I couldn't begin to fathom. I cautiously nudged the small device with the tip of the silver letter opener. It didn't react. It just lay there, inert, a piece of alien hardware dropped onto the roof of my childhood torment. The threat of the sanitation truck below was still present. I could hear its hydraulics hissing as it slowly scanned the immediate area, searching for me where I had been moments ago. I needed to move, and quickly, before the residual effects of whatever frequency that device emitted wore off, and the second agent, or the men in the SUV, realized the tactical situation had changed. Rendezvous point Gamma 7, a code, a destination. It implied that someone was expecting me, someone aware of this deeper structure, someone who knew I was intended to be the scapegoat, but was now, perhaps, my only option for survival. But who? My mother? She was always the silent observer, the one who knew things but never spoke. Or maybe the estranged uncle who everyone said had gone mad and moved to the Swiss Alps 20 years ago after a bitter boardroom split. I scooped up the strange device, tucking it securely into my inner jacket pocket, right next to the letter opener. I had to get off the roof. The fire escape was too exposed. I crept toward the edge of the roof overlooking the rear courtyard, a quieter, darker area usually reserved for caterers' deliveries. I peered over the low parapet wall. The sanitation truck was still milling about by the front entrance, its massive claw occasionally sweeping uselessly across the paved driveway. The front door was being swarmed by the agents, who did look like actual law enforcement now, flashing badges and demanding access. The key lay in the contrast. The uniformed feds believed they were investigating fraud. The silent operatives believed they were suppressing a rogue asset. The two groups were about to collide, and I needed to be the ghost passing between them. I spotted the secondary exit, a rickety, unused service door leading down into the old wine cellar, which connected via a seldom-used utility tunnel network beneath the estate grounds, the network that eventually led out to the public park 3 blocks away. It was a long shot, but better than facing either faction head-on. I took a running start and launched myself over the parapet, aiming for the thick, overgrown wisteria trellis that covered the back wall of the estate, hoping the dense foliage would slow my descent enough to reach the small, dark cellar door undetected. I hit the trellis hard, the dry vines snapping and tearing around me. I slid down several feet before catching a main vine, momentum nearly tearing my arms from their sockets. I swung wildly, narrowly missing a stone gargoyle, until I finally slammed against the back wall, landing hard on the damp earth near the cellar door. The impact jarred the small electronic device in my pocket. It emitted a single, loud, digitized beep. It was too loud. From inside the cellar door, I heard a sharp, metallic click, followed immediately by the unmistakable sound of a bolt being thrown. They had someone inside, too. Or perhaps the agent I saw fall hadn't been the only one assigned to this perimeter. The cellar door swung inward a crack, and a face, pale, severe, and utterly familiar, appeared in the gap, illuminated faintly by the ambient light filtering from the main house. It wasn't an agent. It was my mother. Her eyes, usually so carefully composed, were wide with a terrifying mix of fear and resolve. She didn't speak. She simply looked past me to the chaos erupting on the roof and then back at me, holding a heavy, old-fashioned revolver, the one my grandfather kept locked in his study, pointed directly at my chest. "You shouldn't have come back, Julian," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They warned me. If you crossed the line, you were forfeit. Put the artifact on the ground and walk away. Now." My mother, not the panicked cousin, not the federal investigators, but the quiet, seemingly fragile woman who always stood slightly behind my father, was the one pointing the gun. The betrayal was cold, absolute, and yet, somehow, sickeningly familiar. She wasn't protecting me. She was protecting them, or perhaps the secret that sustained them all. "Mom, it's me," I managed, holding my hands up slowly, careful not to jostle the electronic device or the letter opener. "The thing that fell, the man who fell, he said this family is a hostile network. They're talking about remote termination. I didn't do any of this." She shook her head, a single tear tracing a clean path through the grime on her cheek. "You think I don't know what your father has been doing? I've lived under this lie for 40 years. But you breaking ranks, Julian, that destabilizes everything. They monitor the internal mechanisms. They knew you were going to resign. They just didn't know why you were leaving so suddenly. They assumed you were taking leverage." "I am leverage now, Mom," I countered, gesturing faintly toward my jacket pocket. "I have their tracking device. Whatever this is, it just told me to meet someone at Gamma 7. Your security detail, the ones below, they're looking for the evidence you don't know about, and the ones on the roof were sent by the organization that actually runs Harrington Global. They're not cops. They're cleaning up." Just as I finished speaking, a tremendous crash echoed from the main house. The sound wasn't from breaking glass, but from something heavy hitting the stone facade, a deliberate, loud impact meant to draw attention. My mother's head snapped toward the sound, her resolve momentarily cracking. "That's Gerald. He's drawing the feds away from the rear perimeter." It was the opening I needed. The distraction was not a coincidence. It was calculated. My family, in its death throes, was still capable of complex, albeit self-destructive strategy. If they're drawing the feds away, it means they need time to move something important, I urged, lowering my hands slightly, adopting the tone of an ally rather than a fugitive. The feds will be looking for financial crimes, for paperwork. They won't understand a remote termination signal. If Gamma 7 is the rendezvous point, it's not for me to surrender. It's where they're moving the core servers, or whatever physical asset they need to save before the government locks the doors. My mother hesitated, her eyes darting between the gun in her hand and the dark utility tunnel entrance. The conflict was palpable. Loyalty to the legacy versus the instinct to protect her only son from a secret organization she clearly feared more than the law. "Gamma 7 is the old observatory outside the city limits," she whispered, her voice brittle. "It was built by Grandpa as a private R&D facility completely off the books. They would use it for emergency decommissioning." She suddenly lowered the gun, the heavy silver weapon looking absurdly out of place in her manicured hand. "Take the tunnel," she commanded, pushing the cellar door open fully. "If you have their beacon, you have a temporary shield. But if you go there, Julian, you don't come back. You disappear. If you are seen talking to the feds, they will assume you are playing both sides, and both factions will eliminate you." She grabbed a heavy, leather-bound ledger from a shelf inside the cellar, the old account books everyone thought were boring historical records. "Take this. If you can't destroy the network, at least ensure they can't hide the truth about the money." I snatched the ledger, its weight familiar and grim. "Thank you, Mom." "Don't thank me," she said, her voice already regaining its old, distant composure as she slammed the cellar door shut and threw the heavy deadbolt from the inside. "I never disowned you. I was buying you time." I plunged into the suffocating darkness of the utility tunnel. The air was thick with mildew and dust, but the sound of the chaos above, shouting, sirens, the grinding of the sanitation truck, was muffled, fading rapidly as I moved deeper underground. I ran, clutching the ledger, the strange electronic device buzzing faintly in my pocket like a captured insect. I ran toward Gamma 7, not knowing who I would meet there, the shadowy masters of the Harrington Empire or the faction that wanted to neutralize them. When I finally burst out of the access hatch in the deserted public park, gasping the cool night air, the city skyline glittered distantly. I was alone, covered in dirt, carrying incriminating financial records, and possessing an unknown piece of alien technology. I looked back at the city lights, the familiar glow of the Harrington estate somewhere in that glittering expanse. I was free of their dinner table, but I was now running for my life across state lines, hunted by men who could make people drop dead with a sound wave. As I finally started running toward the highway access road, my phone, which I had silenced hours ago, suddenly blared to life with a new urgent alert. Not a text, not a news headline, but a direct, encrypted communication channel opening on a program I didn't know I owned. The message was simple, accompanied by a map showing the exact route to the observatory. "Welcome, Agent Julian. Your extraction is confirmed. Your parents' final sacrifice was noted. Do not fail to neutralize the core hardware. Gamma 7 awaits the asset transfer."